My name is Norm Buckley. I'm the nominated principal investigator for the Chronic Pain Network. And what I'd like to do right now is briefly introduce our two hosts who are patient partner members of the network. The first is Richard Hovey. Richard covers actually a number of different roles in life and in the network. Richard's an associate professor at McGill in the Faculty of Dentistry, although he is not the person to ask for dental assistance. His area of research is adult learning, community rehabilitation, disability, chronic health conditions, including chronic pain, and his training background is in education, physiology, and health philosophy. And he comes to us both because of that interest, but also because he is a person living with chronic pain himself for the past 8 years. And if I recall correctly, recently published a very interesting synopsis of his experience. I think that's correct. It was very interesting read, very informative, and also I think open of him to present his own experience that way. Our other host is Therese Lane, who is formerly a nurse, who herself suffers from arthritis and fibromyalgia. She's a member of our patient engagement committee. Also, she's part of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, or CAPA, where she's a member of the steering committee there. And she's also a member of the advisory board for the Downtown Toronto Outpatient Program for the Centers for Addiction and Mental Health for people with complex mental illness. And again, I heard Therese's story on another webinar not too long ago, and it was a very compelling personal story of the challenges that she's faced and overcome and lives well with her current situation. And she's actually someone who's found relief and motivation from regular exercise, as now a regular member of the YMCA, and also acts as an advocate for many arthritis programs at the Y. And she's also a member of Women Speak Out, advocating for the homeless and underhoused populations of Toronto. So two very, I will say, talented, experienced, and committed co-hosts now. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Richard, and you, Teresa, and I'll look forward to the rest of the day, and you will introduce the speakers.
Thanks, Norm.
Thanks, Norm.
So,
go ahead, Richard.
Okay, so I specifically can't see my notes because of the patient engagement for the slideshow. I maybe it's best if at that point, if Nader and Lesley can just say a few words about themselves. That way I won't get it wrong. Is that reasonable? Yeah?
Sure.
Sure.
Yes, thank you.
My name is Lesley Singer. I'm a patient representative, and I am currently the co-chair of the KT committee along with Nader. I am a person who's been living with chronic pain for the past 20 years. And I teach at McGill in the Certificate for Chronic Pain Management to healthcare clinicians. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nader Ghasemlou, and I'm an assistant professor at Queen's University, and I am the director, I guess, of the pain chronobiology and immunology labs, and along with Lesley, co-chair of the Knowledge Translation Committee for the CPN. And fun fact, Richard was actually known as Mr. Hovey to me about 20 some odd years ago when he was my high school teacher.
Small world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was great. So, so the objectives for today's webinar is to have the opportunity to hear from researchers and patient consultants to share their experiences of the patient research engagement in a basic science research project, which I think is going to be incredibly interesting, and help understand more about patient engagement approaches in basic science research projects. So in that way, we're going to get, both sides of the story of learning to engage with each other and to produce research that is mutually and respectfully conducted with everybody in that particular research community. So that's what we're going to try to do. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do this very briefly. So a lot of my research has been around the experience of people living with chronic health conditions, as Norm mentioned. And it's really interesting because I have, the majority of my colleagues are basically clinicians or researchers, but they're quantitative. And so we have these little conversations sometimes, and this is what I hear from people living with chronic health conditions. The person with the encased in stone is living with a chronic condition, for example. It could be pain, could be something else, and they will say the way I feel is hard to quantify. And then because of the way people are trained and learn their research or clinical practice, they go, how hard on a scale of 1 to 10? And so we have this sort of a disconnection of one being, from the patient's perspective, a qualitative way, because they only know about their pain through that lived experience. And then we have the clinicians and we have the researchers who understand it from a theoretical biomedical perspective. And so the bridging these gaps, I think, is what this whole process is about. And I think that's what we're going to be doing today. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of what I was talking about before. On one side, on the left side, we have the knowledge holder and healer, and you can see the cogs in that brain turning as they're trying to understand the person living with chronic pain, for example, and trying to understand it through a different series of concepts that they've learned as a researcher, as a clinician. On the other side, we have the person living with chronic pain who basically spends a lot of their time trying to hold things together, trying to have a life that's worth thriving for and doing everything else. But there's also these, the mask that people wear in order to not always be perceived as a person with chronic pain. And I think that's part of what we're looking at too, is that balance between different experiences. So this process is called deconstruction, and it's a method of critical analysis, which then led from this larger slide to the next one, please. So what I did over the past year is that I started to look at, as I attended meetings, and I sit on a number of research projects, sometimes as a patient consultant, but sometimes also, as well as a researcher. And I started to look at, if we were to deconstruct everything, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but you get the idea that the language and the topics are similar, but they come from different disciplines or different experiences. And so in this bow tie model, what happens is when people come together, and that's your researchers and participants and clinicians and patients and stuff, we want something to happen. We want some sort of relational aspect to come together to bring people together in order for them to have an opportunity to learn from each other. And that's always been the ongoing discussion over the past years or many years, is that how do we do that when you have people who come at this from different perspectives? So in the middle, and I'll be finished very soon, is that there are ways from other disciplines, mostly from adult learning or from philosophy and stuff, that look at bringing diverse groups of people together. So if I go on the outer circle, we have two-eyed seeing, which the next session will be done with John Sillyboy and others who I've worked with before. But the idea then is that concept of two-eyed seeing doesn't necessarily just need to rest within indigenous and Western perspectives. It could be a researcher and a person living with chronic health conditions. So we can interpret that and transfer it to other areas. And then we have things like transformational learning theory, which is looking at, from diagnosis to how people learn to live with their chronic pain. And also in doing so, it also informs healthcare practitioners to the idea that there are certain ways of learning about this, which can give them more in-depth understanding and connectedness to their patients, such as reading qualitative papers that have been written, and there's more and more now looking at the lived experience of pain, different kinds of pain, different kinds of scenarios, living in during COVID-19, et cetera. And so for the physician or researcher who's really trying to get a grasp of what it's like to live with those kind of conditions, there's a growing number of really high quality qualitative research projects and papers out there to inform that. So basically, this is what I'm looking at now as far as research goes, is how do we bring people together and use something that was designed specifically outside of medicine and dentistry to bring people together who are very eclectic in what they bring. So there's not it's not the homogeneous group of people who usually work together. Now we're bringing people from different disciplines and stuff. And so there's something that goes on there that we have to sort of deal with. And that's where I want to end it, because we're going to hear from Nader and from Lesley. And so thank you for letting me have a few minutes to go over that.
Thank you, Richard. That was very informative and interesting. So I'm going to start out with first question for Nader. First of all, if you could tell us about the project that you and Lesley are working on with your team.
Yes. So this is the group that's been doing all the work. I don't do much. I sit in an office most of the day. And the group on the left, or at least my left, the larger group is the team that's working on the mouse models that I'll be talking about very quickly, as well as the human work, which is being led by Mitra Knezik, the tall student right next to me. And the human studies that we've been working have really been spearheaded by Etienne Bisson, who is the clinical research coordinator within the Hotel Dieu Hospital here as part of the CPN. And Lesley, as our patient partner, has really helped to move the work forward. Next slide, please. There we go. So this all really started from work that Ian Gilron, who's another member of the CPN, had published back in the early 2000s, where he noticed that people with chronic neuropathic pain actually have a circadian rhythm to their pain intensities. And he found this rhythm where pain was lower in the morning and then higher at night. And I started my position at Queen's in 2015. And as a way of trying to work with the clinicians, I thought this is a really interesting story to try to work on the animal model side. And just to see what are the biological mechanisms, if any, that are controlling it. Next slide. So we began the mouse work, but then thought, let's actually go back to the human data and see if we could recapitulate it ourselves in another model of pain and another disease of pain. And the more important one was when Ian ran his study, and when most of these studies are run, participants are asked to fill out a paper questionnaire. And so we never really know when they're filling out their pain scores throughout the day. So we developed a calendar-based phone app that will prompt the participants of our project who have chronic low back pain with 3 questions at 3 times of day. It was morning, afternoon, and night. So 8 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. And we asked them, what is your mood right now? How much pain do you feel right now? And how much fatigue do you feel right now? We were only going to go with the pain question because it's a pain project, but we realized the phone has a lot more real estate than just for that one question. So we added the other 2 really for fun. Next slide. This is what our participants look like when we split them into male and female over the 7 days that they ran through the study. We see that it's basically, a flat line. Maybe there's a bit of a trend happening in the females. And then next slide. When we averaged out the average 9 p.m., the average 8 p.m. scores and the average 8 a.m. scores, and saw what is the difference between these 2 time points, we see that there's a clear difference in terms of people who feel 30% or more change in their daily pain versus those who don't have that response, who are more constant. And then next slide. If we plot them on those scales, what you can see is, next slide, there we go. that some people clearly have a circadian rhythm to their pain, where it's lower in the morning and higher at night, while others have this constant profile. And so that became really interesting for us. And that's the human side of the project. And then the next slide. I did it in the mouse as well, because so I began as a mouse scientist, a person who's really comfortable talking with animals and working with mice. And I never really liked working with people because people are messy. So this is the mouse work that we were doing. We saw that when we look at the mice at 3 different times of day, during the light phase, which is ZT2 and ZT8, and then in the dark phase, when they're active and awake, ZT14, we saw that the females have the same response time for a heat stimulus, but the males, press the button please, the males don't show this response at night. So at night, when the males are active, what we've found is that they actually don't feel this heat stimulus. And we're trying to figure out the molecular and cellular mechanisms that are regulating it. And we have a feeling that it's because of neutrophils that are in the bloodstream and that enter the tissue at night. And we think secrete opioids that turn off these neurons, these heat sensing neurons at night. And then next slide. We've done this in a model of chronic neuropathic pain with our mice as well. And you can see over the 28-day time course of injury, these animals develop hypersensitivity to a mechanical stimulus during the daytime, so ZT2 and ZT8 hours. But when we look at them at night and we test their mechanical thresholds, next slide, what we see is they don't respond. So the males at night don't feel mechanical pain. And we're trying to figure out why. We don't know why. We're trying to figure out why this is, but we have a feeling that it's an evolutionary response because the males usually at night are out foraging for food. And so they need to be able to find food and bring it back to the nest. And so we have a feeling that this is a response. It's an evolutionary response that the males are not feeling this chronic pain at night, so they can go and find food for their pups and for the nest. But they do during the daytime, which is really when they're asleep. So we're hoping, next slide, to use the mouse work to really inform what's happening in our human studies and vice versa, to figure out what are the mechanisms that are at play. And this is a project that Lesley has been helping us to figure out what is the patient experience in this, the chronic pain that we're studying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nader. So this is for Lesley. Can you describe how you got paired with Nader and his team for their project?
Yeah, I was at an annual meeting of the CPN, and I was speaking to another patient partner, and I had mentioned that I had briefly been involved with one study, but at the time I was not associated with any other study, and I was hoping that I would be. And so she said, this is perfect timing because Nader, that guy over there, is looking for someone to be in his study, someone to help with his study. So she said, why don't you talk to him after and see, if you two can pair together and work on that. So after the meeting, I spoke to Nader, and at first, when he said it was basic science, I was like, oh boy, that's not what I thought I was signing up for here. And I listened to him, and then I think I went home with the information, started thinking about it, and lo and behold, here we are paired, and it's working so well.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. How often do you meet? Well, how often do you get in touch now? I guess email updates or phone. How do you manage now?
I would say that we meet most often.
Sure, thanks.
We most often meet through emails. However, we often do Zoom calls as well. How often we meet depends on what we're working on. Lately, I've been on the phone more and emailing with Mitra, who is working on that, working on the phone app that you just saw. And so we were going back and forth with, you know, how much information does a patient partner, another patient need to be able to participate in this study? How much technology do they need to know? And so I think we've been going back and forth with how much we need to provide patients who will be doing that in order to use their cell phone. If they're like me, they're not tech savvy. And so, you know, the instructions seem very clear to Mitra on the email. And I was like, where do I click? What do I do? And so getting back to her was giving the patient perspective of, you know, this is very clear to you, but when I follow it, I can't follow it with the knowledge that I have. So we've been back and forth a little more often. So it depends what you're working on. And Nader and I will speak regularly. You know, we speak as co-chairs anyway. And so we'll often just bring up something, oh, how have you been thinking about this? Or I was thinking about this. So it's some of it is planned and some of it is just on the spur of the moment. We get into talking, and once we get into talking, like Nader, you can't shut us up, right?
Nader, how has Lesley helped move this project forward?
So
Has there been any unintended consequences of this?
yeah, so you know, honestly, this began as a mouse project, and I had never worked with a patient partner before, especially on a basic science project. We thought, like, you know, how would this happen? And then what we thought was, let's get the perspective of, you know, what should we be looking at in our animal models in the first place? What are the concerns that you have? And that was, you know, beginning to talk about it with Lesley. But then when we began to really ramp up our human studies, we were realizing that we weren't reaching a lot of patients. The population in Kingston isn't that huge, and so finding people was hard. And so we were having this discussion with Lesley and said, you know, yeah, we're having a really hard time recruiting people. This was, I think, one of our regularly scheduled chats that we had. And Lesley said, well, have you tried, you know, reaching out to people through the other clinics that are in town or posting up flyers? We thought, oh my God, like, why have we not thought of this? And so it was kind of these obvious things that we never thought about because we're kind of locked away in our own worlds that Lesley brought to us, that allowed us to really ramp up the project and to come towards completion for it. And then in terms of the unintended consequences of it, this is actually of a chat that Lesley and I were having about the mouse data. And this was, I think, 8-9 months ago, before the pandemic. And we were chatting about the mouse data. And I said, oh, we have this really cool stuff about the cells changing, blah, blah, blah. But it's in this mouse neuropathic model. And Lesley mentioned, she said, you know, I actually have chronic post-surgical pain. And I said, well, we love using the post-operative pain model in our animals as a way of looking at the immune response, but we never thought about looking at circadian rhythms of pain in that model because we never thought there would be. And so when Lesley said, I have chronic post-operative pain and I see a rhythm to that pain, I thought, well, we should test this out. And so in the next series of animals that we were running for behavioral analysis, I told the student, I said, you know, check to see what's happening for the pain response of these mice throughout the day. And lo and behold, we found a rhythm to their pain that we never expected to see. And so this has now set off a new area of research for our lab that we didn't expect to be doing at all. And it's because of speaking with a patient partner.
Wow. I'm kind of envious because I was paired with a basic scientist and we just didn't have a clue where I was going to fit in, or so it was a lot of trial and error. Any meetings we had were initiated by me, but I mean, he was very nice, and I felt most welcome when I went to the lab. But we didn't have that same dynamic, I guess, that you and Lesley have, and this is great. This is how it's meant to be. Yes, yeah. Great. Thank you. I think Richard was, oh, no, it's me again. You answered that question already. You hadn't worked with another patient partner, so this was new for you too.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
completely new experience. I've never worked with patient partners before. We have worked with patient groups. And so what we've done there is we had reached out to, so when I started, we work on spinal cord injury, and we also work on multiple sclerosis. And so we had reached out to Spinal Cord Injury Ontario's chapter in Kingston and the MS Society's chapter in the Kingston area, and just wanted to introduce ourselves. And we ended up going as a lab to one of their monthly meetings. And we met with the people there, and we discussed about our work and what we do. And we thought that that would be the end of it. But what ended up happening was that people from those sessions actually contacted us and said, we'd love to come and check out your lab and see what it is that you do. And so we had a group of 4 people living with a spinal cord injury come to our lab and check out what we do, and spend some time talking with us about their pain and experience on a daily basis. And so that was really great for the team to see.
Yeah. So do you still think of people as messy?
Yes. They're not like our mice that respond the same way every single day.
Thank you. Thank you for being honest.
I guess those mice didn't have too much baggage.
No, I know.
So I have a question for Lesley. Are there other projects you are involved with, either through the CPN or elsewhere?
Yeah, I worked through the CPN with another project where I was involved at the very beginning. I was asked about how I thought about pain and emergency room, and this project about looking into people with chronic pain going to the emergency room. And so I, read what research had been done by that group so far. And I thought it was a great project because I had been at the ER many times with my back pain. And so it was a topic that interested me. So I got involved early in it. And then during their actual study, I wasn't involved at all. And so I almost thought that, oh, I guess this didn't work out or whatever. And then later, I heard back from the group, and the study had taken place, and now they were looking at writing an article about it, and I got involved again. So I was involved in the very beginning of the project, and I was involved in the end, and actually many, many, many drafts and thoughts and analytical reasons why this was happening, and actually was involved with the published article. And so it was a different way of being involved, because I was involved at the very beginning when I got really interested in the project. And I kind of thought, wow, it's too bad it didn't work out type of thing. Then got involved in the end, and it was a whole new process of being involved and looking at drafts, writing comments, and ending up being a co-author on the article. And so I was involved with that project. And then after that, I became involved with Nader, and it was a whole different thing again with the basic science. And as well, right now, I'm involved in a different way as, again, it's not a CPN project. However, it is a project about education. And so this one is about the education of physiotherapists across Canada about pain. And so we're looking at how much does each university give their physiotherapy students concerning pain. And that's, you realize that things are measured in so many different ways. And so one university might say that they have a lot, but they're measuring every time they say the word pain. So it could be in an orthopedics class, but it's not pain-based. And other universities have just whole courses on pain. So it's very different, and which can lead to very different treatments across Canada, depending on where your physiotherapist went to school. And so it's really interesting because it's a 5-year project where I've been involved from the very beginning. So we did the grant proposal, we wrote it up. There's 2 patient partners. I'm a co-applicant, a co-investigator in the whole study. And so the other patient partner and I, we had to do our budget. And so what did we think it would cost to have us involved with it? And so we did all that part, and now we're completely involved, and it's very regimented. So you have regular meetings and you have subcommittee meetings, and it's different in that way. So it's really neat to be involved with different types of projects, and yet the common denominator is that you are a patient partner. And so whichever project you're working on, you're looking at as a patient partner. So that's my 3rd experience.
Great, thanks,
Thank
Lesley.
you. This is a question for both of you. Obviously, your partnership is working out well. So what ideas would you have that you could share that other patient partners and basic scientists could, what could you come up with to have them work together more? Because there is a great divide there.
You know, there is a great divide. However, as a patient partner, I think, you know, we always talk about pain as bio, psycho, and social. And I mean, this is basic science. This is the biological part. So if you stop and think, why does this medication work for this patient? Why does it matter what is going on in the body? Well, of course it does. And so when you think of how we find out about those things, it's often through basic science. And so I think that it's such a great divide, but we have a common interest. We want to make pain management better. And so I think when we look at it that way, we're all in it for the same reason. And right, Nader, basic scientists are humans. So they're real people. I don't deal with the mouse, I deal with nature. And so it's yes, it's a great divide, but we have to stop thinking like that. Like when I think of the 3 different projects, they're educators, they're basic scientists, they're clinicians, they're, you know, this is multidisciplinary. So we have to look at all of it. We have to look at the basic science. We have to look at the clinicians. We have to look at the patient partners. And so let's start thinking of ourselves as a big group. And so you maybe are working with this part or that part, but it's not basic science versus clinician versus this. We can work in all parts of it.
Yeah, I think the big issue that we have is that as a basic scientist, I'm in a laboratory setting. I'm almost never in a clinical setting. And so I never see people who are living with pain. I never have the opportunity to interact with them. So I think that clinicians are really in that prime spot. They have that prime real estate of being in the hospital setting, in the clinical setting, where they can actually interact with people with lived experience and ask them, you know, how do you feel? What are you going through? And we don't have that option. I did my PhD in spinal cord injury research, working with the mouse models. I had never met someone with a spinal cord injury until I was like four years into my PhD, and I was presenting a poster at the Society for Neuroscience meeting, and a person living with a spinal cord injury came to my poster and said, "What are you doing and how will it help me?" And it really hit home, where I just went like, oh my God, I never thought about. Honestly, you know, I just think of my mice that have a spinal cord injury and how I'm going to help the mice. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to help people, but you don't think about it because you're not exposed to people. And I think that what we need to do is really find ways to put people with lived experience in the same room as a basic scientist and to allow for that dialogue to happen, like Richard said, right? It's only through communication that we're going to be able to answer the big questions. And I think that the problem is that we don't have those opportunities. And I almost wish that networks like the CPN existed when I was a graduate student, so that I could be put in contact, in touch with a person with lived experience. And I can tell you, my trainees who are working with Lesley, like not talking to Lesley, they're working with Lesley, are telling me this is changing the way that I'm thinking about research in general and the questions that we're asking and why we're asking those questions. And so I think that what we really need to do is, apart from having more networks like CPN that are putting scientists and people with lived experience together, but maybe even thinking about it on a more broader scale, and how, you know, like, why don't hospitals have a patient, like a center for patient-oriented research where people with lived experience can go into that space, and scientists and clinicians can go in there as well and just have dialogue together. So that, I think, would be really like a fantastic way of really blowing this up and saying, let's expand how we think of it, and not just have it within networks, but within hospitals, within how we think about research in general. Yeah.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
So I have a question for both of you. What message or messages or advice do you have for other patient consultants, partners, and scientists interested in working together?
I would say, just building on what Nader said, I think that you really need to get into the dialogue, because that's where, I guess, things eased up for me. When Nader and I spoke, we just spoke as two people, and things came up that I didn't realize I was helping out with. It just came with speaking about your experience. What is your experience as a person living with chronic pain? And so you speak about that, and lo and behold, you know, you've offered some help to the clinician, to the basic scientist. And so I think just speaking about your experience, speak about what you know, and questions will come from that, a topic will come from that, ideas will come from that, and they'll develop from there. So the advice that I would have is just be yourself and talk about what you know, and don't underestimate. You can sit there and talk and think nothing's happening, but it is. You're creating ideas. Ideas are being created within you. And so the dialogue is the most important thing, just as it is between the clinician and the patient, just as it is between two people. We need to just talk more.
I think you're completely right, Lesley. And I think it's really to have an honest conversation, right? I think a lot of basic scientists will be afraid of asking a person with lived experience, what's it like? Because it's something that we're honestly removed from, right? We're not in that realm to know what it's like. And so, you know, luckily, I feel like sometimes I'm missing a frontal lobe. So I just ask Lesley, what's it like living with chronic pain, right? What happened? You know, why do you have chronic pain? What was the reason behind it? You know, can you point it to a specific time and place that happened? What does your pain feel like? And that was the discussion that we were having, where the chronic post-operative pain came up. And so those are, I think, the really key messages that I would have, is to be open and honest with each other about those conversations, and to feel safe and comfortable to ask the questions that you might think are dumb questions, almost, to just be like, I want to know, tell me more about your pain, tell me more, you know, like Lesley asks us, tell me more about the mice, like, you know, what do you do to the mice that they have pain, and what do you do in terms of all these other things? And so these are the kinds of questions that I think people need to be open to asking.
We have a question from Francine, and it's kind of an interesting question. If you were both stuck in an elevator for 2 minutes with the basic scientists, how would you explain to them the value of patient engagement to basic science? And that's to both of you.
I don't think that I would try to explain to him the value of it. I hope that talking with him for 2 minutes about my experience he would see the value in having it. So rather than explaining to him, I would prefer that he experience it and come away with the idea, wow, that would be really great to work with someone who has chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really eloquently put, right? Isn't it? Like the experience of what the person is going through, is feeling, the emotional side of it, the physical side of it, all of it, just to know what that feels like for the person. I think for me, as a basic scientist talking to another basic scientist, I would say there are questions that you haven't asked because you don't know to ask it. And you won't know to ask that question unless you speak to someone with lived experience, right? And the prime example that comes from that is spinal cord injury research has always been about making people walk again. Because we thought, well, if you're in a wheelchair, you must want to walk again. As basic scientists, that's what we all thought. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, people began to ask people with a spinal cord injury, what do you want? And walking was like number 6 or 7 on the list. It was more return of bladder function, return of sexual function, get rid of my chronic pain. These were the things that people were talking about, not the part about the wheelchair, because they had learned to accept it. And not only accept it, but they began to build their lives knowing that I'm probably not going to walk again. So I'm going to make this the best experience that I can. And so that has now changed the face of spinal cord injury research, where people are saying, we're not really interested in making people walk again because that's going to be really hard to do. People are working on it. It's not that we're not, but these are other questions that we've never asked before and that we need to start asking to actually improve people's lives now. So that's the big part of it, I think.
I'd like to sort of jump in now just to, as a qualitative researcher for the last almost 20 years, what you've just explained, Nader and Lesley, has been the core of qualitative research. So there's so much out there which then can help people to understand that the needs that people want are not the ones we assume they want. And time again, that's the strength and value of qualitative research, is that you're hearing from the people who are living with that condition what they want, not the assumption that somebody who's not living with it thinks they want. And this has been my experience time and time again, is that's what happens when you start to do it. The problem is people don't read much outside of their discipline. So I would say that for the most part, most clinicians may or may not, or may probably have not read a qualitative study for whatever reason. And yet, when you talk about what you're doing here, I myself have published at least 20 papers on relationship within bringing people together, either clinically or research-wise. And you two, Lesley and Nader, are an example of how a relationship opened up to more openness, which opened up to more interpretation of each other's, thinking, to the point where you become a very functional, I wouldn't say team, but community, where you have people of all different backgrounds and stuff contributing to it. And I think that's the major flaw, is that we don't read outside of our discipline. And a lot of people think that qualitative research is the lesser cousin of quantitative, but yet, Nader, you never would have found out those things had you not asked those questions. And I think that's what we need to instill, is that, we have all sorts of research out there for all sorts of different reasons. And I'll just finish off with 1 second, is that, in 40 years of doing this stuff, I've been on research teams that should have been on paper outstanding. And I've been other ones where I didn't think it was going to work. And the ones that worked always had a strong relationship among the participants. So, integrity, dignity, respect, all those things that we use were in place. And yet everybody felt they move from inclusion to belonging. And once you feel like you belong, then it makes it easy. And that's exactly what you two just explained. And I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
I really feel that too. The longer we go on, Nader, the more I'm part of your team. I'm part of the group. And I think that I worried about that coming into it a little bit later, as opposed to being there from the start, because that is different if you're involved at the beginning. But I think what you said, Richard, is so true, because we have such a good relationship and we can just talk, and then you put me in touch with this person or that person, and look, I do feel part of the team, and it's because we all work well together, and I think that's so important. And another thing that you said, Richard, made me think of when I used to go to the pain center, and of course, as your first slide showed, what is your pain on a scale of 0 to 10? And one day I said to him, you know what? Don't ask me how much my pain is on 0 to 10. Ask me how much it bothers me on a scale of 0 to 10. And he said, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
And I said, I could have a pain of 7 on 10, but if it doesn't bother me and I'm doing something else and I'm doing something really important, it doesn't bother me. But sometimes I have pain of 2 on 10 and I can't stand it. So it doesn't matter what it is on 10. It matters how much it interferes with my life, how much it bothers me. And
Well put,
I think
Lesley.
that to me made so much sense. Yet it was just a standard question. What is your pain on a scale of 0 to 10? You know?
That's a really good question. We should add to our survey app there. How much does it bother you? Because I bet we'll see a difference. I don't know.
Here we go again.
Can we ask that question, right? It's like pain interference of some sort. Yeah, I mean that's a really good idea, Lesley. So one of the things I'll add is, like, Lesley started off as a patient partner, right? And it began as patient partner, 2 separate words, right?
Yeah.
And then what happened was, in the past, I'd say, what is it, like 3-4 months, it has turned into, no, Lesley's a partner. And it changed when we began to have these emails back and forth with my students and I asked, why isn't Lesley on this discussion? She would have the answer to your questions. And then my trainees said, well, we weren't sure if we should be including Lesley on these emails or not. I said, no, you got to include her on all the emails. And then I don't have to answer them, because the person who's going to be, doing the experiment themselves at home with the app will be the one who's going to answer it. And so that has also changed how the people in the lab think of Lesley as well. She's no longer a patient partner, she's a partner. She's part of the research group.
And I think what you've done, as that role evolves from patient partner, which is kind of ambiguous, to patient consultant, for example. She's now consulting on your projects, and you have that relationship that's been forming. So there is a transition of role from being a patient partner, which really doesn't say anything, I don't think, to becoming somebody who's sharing their perspective and consulting as well. So I think that's something we need to look at over time, is that, what is your real role? And I hear time and time again, it's more of a consultant than it is just merely being a patient. Even the word itself is kind of being a patient. Anyway, all right.
So I see a question.
Therese,
you want to pick it up there? Yeah.
No, I just was saying that Mary has said that she shied away from collaborating with the basic scientists, but won't be shying away anymore after this.
No, absolutely do not. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a question. Can you see it?
Yeah,
Nader, go ahead.
Yeah,
go
do
ahead.
you have an organized way within the chronic pain community to connect researchers and patient partners? I don't think we do. I think the CPN is really the only vehicle that we have to do this. So this is something, honestly, that the Canadian Pain Society should think about doing, because they have now the patients included, right, for the meetings.
Yeah.
This is like, they should have a meet and greet of come and meet people living with pain and talk with them.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people would be very nervous about doing that, right?
Mhm.
But I mean, you give them like a drink ticket and everyone will be there, right?
Yeah.
And then having that mingling, because they do that at
Mm.
the Society for Neuroscience does that. So with spinal cord
Mhm.
injury and other diseases, they'll have the foundations will put together a meet and greet almost. And they'll just have people come in the room who are usually funded by the organization to meet with the donors and to, the people who are living with the disease or the injury that they're working on. And then people just chat, and then you get to make those connections.
That's, you know, you're speaking of bringing people together. And that was the idea of the bow tie model, is taking these different perspectives. When they come to the middle, not just letting things happen serendipitously, but also to do something from other disciplines like transformational learning or adult education or whatever else, to get people interacting, like almost setting it up so that they do it. Because somebody like yourself, Nader, seems to be quite natural and personable with others, and others aren't quite that comfortable or don't know how to start it. So you would need something to facilitate that activity. And I think that's sometimes missing. And what happens is it stalls. It just doesn't get to where you want it, or to where you and Lesley are.
Yeah. I think if the CPN didn't have this as part of its mandate, I probably would not have done it. And I think that we would have been poorer for it.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know our project would not be where it is today if it wasn't for Lesley. So I mean, like the one thing I would say is like everybody who's on this call who is a person living with pain, I would say reach out to people who are working, to basic scientists who are working on the type of pain that you have, and just say hi. You know, if you ever needs some input in terms of what, you know, people with fibromyalgia, with, you know, diabetic neuropathy are going through, feel free to drop me a line. And I would bet that people would just say, I've never received that kind of email before, you know, let's hear about it. Yeah.
I think
you think they would respond to that? Yeah.
I think some would.
Yeah.
But I think really having like a group somewhere that would do it, that would make the matches, make the connections, would be really valuable.
Yeah, Mary has asked, do you think that the CIHR would have something like that, where they bring patient partners and researchers together? Do you think?
They should have something like that. I think that they don't, that's never part of the discussion in terms of grant writing, right? When we put in a basic science.
Basic science, yeah. Researchers certainly they do, because you look at the grant proposals, and so once I was invited to the CIHR to review the grant proposals, and I'm telling you, that was very intimidating. But at the end of it, I started to realize what my role was more. And as Richard said, it was an organized activity where I was put into it. And then at the end of the first day, I felt, oh, okay, I'm starting to realize what my role is. And I hadn't at that time been exposed to researchers. And so it gave me more of an idea of who they were and what they talked about. And it's true, Richard, I think you need to come up with an activity to be done to bring us together.
Yeah.
Well, that's the knot in the bow tie model. And interestingly enough, I just submitted it with Katie Burney. We had this conversation at the last meeting, and then what I did was I took that model and we had a conversation. So I'd send it to her, she'd write back, and so we just submitted today to the Journal of Qualitative Research. And I think you know, this is where we need to start to talk about is, you know, Nader and Lesley have this wonderful story, but it's not common. It's not the story that a lot of people experience. So we have to find a way to make it less haphazard and more constructed. And there are different ways out there of doing that. One way I did once was I was part of a research meeting with basic science researchers, and we were sitting around, we had a little time, and I said, I don't know why you guys, meaning the clinicians and researchers, got into pain research or interested in pain. So you know us because we were in pain. And so it opened up a dialogue that then brought everybody to an understanding of each other's perspective. Only by asking the story of like what Nader, what you just did, you just explained to us how you came to do that research. And what that does is it kind of humanizes the whole experience, and it kind of equates everybody. So there's no asymmetry in the relationship. We're just people talking about pain from different perspectives. And I think that's what we need to focus in on in the future.
So how can we bring
I
this
have
in?
to, oh, I have
How can we bring this
to,
into CPS?
put- oh, I have to bring an end to this now.
Sorry,
So this has been,
Grace. See,
no,
Nader, you can't stop me.
this, no, I know, well, we were warned, I guess. Thank you so much. This has been a great webinar. And thanks again to Nader and to Lesley. And the next webinar will be on November the 18th, and that is Indigenous Health Research on Two-Eyed Seeing, hosted by CPN members John Silboy, Christy Barnaby, Margaret Laverley, and Margot Latimer. So thanks again and have a great day.